Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my epic trip to Florida. The first in about 2 years, I want to say on this one. Yeah, 2 years because I couldn't go down in 2020 because of the pandemic, which made travel across state lines very difficult, and particularly from New York down to pretty much anywhere and vice versa. Now all that's gone. I was able to finally make the trip. And as you can see from the point we're at now, I have safely arrived at my hotel and ready to get into R&R mode. The first step I had, of course, was the usual housekeeping, as I call it, procedures once you arrive. That is to say, to set up your schedule for what you're going to do, get the tickets in order if you haven't already. Normally, I would wait until I got down to buy the tickets, as it just seemed to work out easier. I'd avoid the lines, etc. However, the way Disney's been doing things this year, or at least up to the point where I'm making this video, is that you're required to have a reservation to get to the park itself. Please note this trip took place about a month ago, so there are going to be some more safety precautions still in place that have since been lifted. All that said, reservations are required at the park, and if you're going to make a reservation, you have to have a ticket. So I took care of those ahead of time. The Universal tickets I had to square away, which I promptly would take care of, as well as the transportation to and from the parks. And this is where very specifically I ran into my first headache. Arranging transportation is usually a matter of me going to the concierge desk and booking transportation for which park I want to go to, paying a fee, all said and done. Once I arrived, I was informed that transportation in Orlando was notoriously terrible. I was then told that I should have an Uber pass to get around, which I thought was interesting. And well, here it came. If I were to sign up for another tour of another property, I could get some savings toward my tickets and thus be more able to afford my transportation to and from the parks. I should have guessed this was going to happen. I promptly informed the person attempting me to sell the particular property to myself or even a tour of it that I already owned via my family one of the higher end accommodations at this particular property, and therefore the point was moot. There was no reason for me to go on the tour. Lo and behold, then suddenly out of the sheer magic, the transportation list suddenly appeared, and there were in fact buses in fact to travel back and forth between the hotel. Admittedly, transportation was quite difficult, but still it would have been nice to have been told about this before getting the sales pitch. Whatever the case, after some more wrangling, including being told the buses now only ran every other day or only on certain days, I found out they did in fact run every day. I was able to schedule a passage, if you will, to Universal Studios from the hotel and back. The reason why I used the almost dramatized expression passage is that transportation was in fact a mess. Admittedly, transportation to Disney would prove to be a big issue in itself, but later on I'd find an easy solution to it. Whatever the case, I had initially planned to not do anything on my first day in Florida, but I decided I'd had enough of not being able to be at the theme parks and thus bought a ticket to Universal Studios, which I did get an actually interesting and very helpful tip from the person assisting me, who informed me that if I bought the 1 day pass with the hopper on it, I could use that as a credit toward buying a season pass. With the season pass totaling around $300, I was essentially able to acquire the season pass for just a little bit over $200, which was not a bad deal at all, especially considering all the flexibility, as I could now visit the parks at any time I'd liked. The price also proved very competitive, where I had to pay in excess of $500 to do 5 days at Disney, a huge savings right then and there, mainly because Universal gave credit for the 1 day hopper ticket as part of the actual season pass I purchased. Anyway, with all the wrangling done, tickets in hand, transportation booked, plans in hand as well, I headed back to my room to relax a little bit before heading out to the local Applebee's for dinner. I hadn't been to Applebee's much since the pandemic started, and I was happy to just be out anywhere, and I enjoyed this quesadilla, something I had been craving for I don't know how long. Things were so badly locked down where I come from, things like this were impossible to get for so long. And then, of course, I kept it healthy after that with with a chicken salad, not quite literally a chicken salad sandwich, but a salad with chicken, I should say. Forgot what they called that. Very tasty. The next day, I made my way over to Universal Studios. Immediately, I noticed one very critical thing. There were almost no lines. It may have been the time I'd come. This is admittedly a Wednesday. Who the heck goes to a theme park on a Wednesday? Nonetheless, it was still kind of alien to walk into this place and have no crowds. It was also alien to have my temperature taken and to have a mask on. Please note, the mask requirements have been dramatically reduced and or loosened since I made my trip, which is almost a month ago, and the temperature taking stations are now a thing of the past. Interestingly enough, while I was very concerned about the masks messing up my entire time down in Orlando enjoying the theme parks, etc., I barely really noticed I had it on. It was really kind of weird. Probably most likely because I spent the whole past year wearing one for work. Yeah, really kind of strange. And speaking of strange, zoinks! It's Scooby Doo and the gang! I have to admit, it was pretty cool being able to actually see live characters with all the restrictions in place, and it was really cool that Universal Studios was able to pull this off. Even if the Mystery Machine, the van that the Scooby-Doo gang drives around in, was in fact a Volkswagen bus, not a Ford Econoline. Hate to be picayune, but yeah, I am a car guy, and something like that drives me nuts. Another interesting quirk of all the pandemic precautions is I literally got to ride the Simpsons The ride, if you will, solo. Solo, just me in the ride vehicle, no one else. Which is kind of crazy if you think about it like that. Then again, there was a noticeable backside to the whole situation, if you will, and that was the line to get on the ride was massive, even though there weren't that many people on it, because of all the required waiting to keep people separate. And situations like mine, where I was a single person that basically took a vehicle designed for 8 people and rode it by myself, causing many more people to have to wait their turn just to get on the ride. Getting food at Universal proved to be a big challenge, as it turned out you had to actually have a table before you could even have your meal cooked, even if you pre-ordered it on the app, whereas at Disney this was not required. Speaking of Disney, the next day I would make my way over to Hollywood Studios. I was, of course, strongly interested in getting on the Rise of the Resistance, which unfortunately I would fail miserably at despite having 2 days at the park. Transportation was another headache as well. The Disney transportation system is, in my humble opinion, the closest thing we have in the US to the Swiss transport system. It's always on time, the buses usually and boats, etc. usually run a few minutes apart. Whole is usually, well, please note that term, usually. The pandemic had caused adverse issues, of course a lot of drivers and transport operators alike being laid off. Suddenly now there was a demand for them, and getting them all back onto duty proved to be a bit of a challenge. And the end result was, of course, longer waits at the buses and dramatically reduced transportation, combined and aggravated by the social distancing requirements that shut down the monorail to Epcot. The end result of all of this was a very un-Disney-like 45 minutes between the bus from the actual Disney Transportation and Ticket Center to the Disney park I was heading toward. On top of this, because of the scaled-back buses, the only real way I could get from the Transportation and Ticket Center to other parks was to literally walk right over to the Polynesian Resort and wait for a bus there, adding more agony to the whole situation. This would prove disastrous on a few occasions, as I would not be able to make my bus for the trip back to the hotel, and one day have to cough up the feed to take a cab back. The next time this happened, I remembered something. There is actually a public transportation system in Florida called Link that actually has a bus that stops literally a few hundred yards, or about 100 yards, even less than that, maybe to my hotel. That particular bus stops right at the Transportation and Ticket Center. So essentially for $2 I found on that one day I was stranded, I could get on the bus and ride back straight to the hotel if I wanted to. However, I found another advantage to this. The bus would actually stop at a point right outside the Disney property, which had plenty of restaurants, including an Applebee's, an Olive Garden, a Chevy's, which I believe was a Mexican restaurant, as well as a Taco Bell, a Burger King, a Denny's, and I'm not sure, and a whole bunch of other restaurants. I essentially could get off the bus, eat dinner, and then arrive back at the hotel. It was very convenient, and when I purchased the 7-day pass, I found I could use the bus unlimitedly, making this a bargain. So instead of spending $10 a day to get back and forth between the park, I basically spent about $16 for the week and got unlimited access to using the bus. And as we can see by this video footage, one of the first things I did when I arrived at MGM Studios, that first day at MGM Studios I should say, was to attend the Muppet Vision 3D show. A true classic in my opinion, especially if you're a Muppets / Fraggle Rock fan and or Jim Henson fan of any kind. After enjoying the antics of the Muppets, and of course it being close enough to lunchtime, I decided next I would adjourn to Pizza Rizzo and enjoy something I haven't enjoyed in quite some time, and that was, of course, a meatball sub. And actually quite tasty. Incidentally, the online ordering app from Disney worked very well at this point. If I remember correctly, I put the order in and essentially did some souvenir shopping until I heard it was ready. I should mention at this point that the crowd at MGM, or should I say Hollywood Studios, wasn't all that massive, although there were some waits such as Mickey Minnie's Runaway Railway particularly was bad, being a relatively new ride, that's not surprising. What was also surprisingly busy was Lightning McQueen's Race Academy. I liked that quite a bit. I also then went over to the Toy Story Land and gave the Midway Mania a try, and as you said, I think I did pretty respectably on that. 107,000, although I've seen better scores. I did attempt to get on Slinky Dog Coaster, aka Slinky Dog Dash, but every time I tried this, and I can't make this up, literally I either got rained out or something else happened, so unfortunately it didn't happen on this trip. Next, I was able to catch, as we see, a cavalcade, as they call it. These are meant as temporary replacements for the actual parades. In my case, I particularly cared for these as they had one of my favorite cars, the Chevy Camaro, featured in them, and they also featured some of my favorite Disney characters. So really, how much better can you get than that? And after a nice, pleasant, and fun-filled day, I made my way back to my hotel. The next day, I would adjourn to Epcot, which, well, park under construction is an understatement. You wouldn't know it from this initial shot here of all the pleasant, and I'm very happy to admit it, plant sculptures that all made a reoccurrence and reappearance, but the place was a pretty big mess in terms of construction. This is mainly because the entire facility was under major overhaul when the whole coronavirus thing started, and then of course construction was halted. And so, as we can see by these shots, the place was essentially a massive construction zone with signs and everything boarded off in different directions as Innoventions was being in the midst of as being destroyed. There were some things like Figment over here that were in pretty good shape. The Journey into Imagination, the boat ride, which is the Living with the Land, very interesting, worked. Although the German teddy bear shop, which we see, was closed, which is an unfortunate thing. The trains were, of course, running, and oh, shock of all shockers, you probably find this shocking, but yes, I spent some time filming them, even though they haven't changed much most recently. In more recent times, not this year, but a couple of years ago, this whole layout was drastically overhauled. The only unfortunate quirk being is that I never actually managed to visit the park when all the trains were operating. There was always at least one derailed. This may, of course, been due to an employee shortage. And speaking of employee shortages and people not there, all the international employees that usually work at these pavilions weren't really present. There were a few that had obviously maybe at one point lived in those countries and had now moved to the U.S. that were there, but obviously with the current situation with the COVID-19 virus, they weren't able to be there to actually run the attractions. Nonetheless, it was still pleasant to be able to visit these places. One unfortunate quirk of this was that the Nine Dragon restaurant was closed, one of my favorite places to stop for a bite to eat, because there's usually not much of a line, because it's kind of buried back in the China Pavilion. The food I always find is very good there. I happen to like Chinese food, and the particular one I like is the Honey Crisp chicken. Whatever the case, unfortunately, it was closed and I couldn't visit it, sob, but I was just glad again to be here, so I can't complain too much, can I? Now, while a lot of the restaurants are closed, luckily one of them that was still open was what was formerly known as Alfredo's, which is now known as Tutu Italia, and of course I had to stop there, as you know, and have my mozzarella and tomato, fresh mozzarella and tomato. I forgot what they called the appetizer there specifically, but it wasn't referred to as that. And I also grabbed a lasagna, and of course a cannoli for dessert. I mean, I had to. You see, I'm doing a public service here. I had to taste the food to let you know how good it was, and yeah, it was very good. Or at least that's what I'm telling myself. And actually, despite all my splurges, and I did splurge on this trip, I didn't really pick up much in the way of weight at all on this trip. I basically attribute this to all the walking I did and the fact that I did try to take it easy and was kind of forced to because of the strict eating rules. And of course, needless to say, I stopped by the Test Track Pavilion and rode Test Track, and of course, took a lot of extensive shots of the Chevy Camaro that had on display. That was one thing I wasn't going to miss. See here, pardon the blurriness of the video of the pictures. I was actually having issues with my camera at this point. Again, I apologize for the blurry footage, but the humidity was playing havoc with my camera lens on my cell phone. But as you can see, all the actual facility inside the test track area, which usually has these interactive displays, games, etc., all of that was shut down due to social distancing. Then at the end of the day, I adjourned to, of all places, Denny's. I hadn't been there in a long time. Again, the Link 50 bus passed the area, so it was just easier to get off there and eat instead of having to get back to the hotel and then turn around and go out again. It just made more sense to do it this way, and so I did. And as you can see, I had some chicken fingers with some broccoli and some herb rice, as well as a schnookie, which is apparently a cookie with caramel apple dress sauce and vanilla ice cream. Very tasty, by the way. And as we take this last shot of the Mouse Gear, or should I say temporary, I believe, Mouse Gear store in Epcot, it's a good place to end this video, especially considering that the rest of my footage unfortunately was lost due to a major cell phone malfunction yet again. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and as always, keep the metal side down.